if you were watching the sort of undercurrents, you knew that this was all going to come to a head here, right? So what did you make of Bill de Blasio's op-ed over the weekend? I mean, he basically was siding with you, right?
Well, thanks for having me, first off. And, you know, the thing about his op-ed is if you looked at it and you listened to the debate that was unfolding, you might think, in fact, that he was siding with us. But the reality is that the legislation that's been proposed is going to do nothing to address the crisis that's unfolding in the industry as we speak. And you put up the graphic about the data. Those numbers really only tell part of the story because it's the what happens next question that everyone really should be talking about.
But how not? Okay, so the legislation, correct me if I'm wrong, that's being proposed right now is to limit, right, the growth of these ride-sharing cars on the streets. I mean, in DeBlasio's op-ed, it was something like 2,000 are added every month. So you're saying that even if he slows the growth down, that's still going to bring down the price of these medallions?
Sure. I mean, as a practical matter, and there's a lot of irony to it. Uber is out there attacking the mayor, saying he's doing the bidding of Big Taxi.
Yeah.
But in point of fact, this legislation doesn't help Big Taxi. The crisis that's unfolding in the industry is a direct result because of Uber's business model in New York City. The fact of the matter is it's been the law from almost 80 years in New York that you cannot pick up street hails unless you have a medallion. That's the thing that anchors the value of the medallion. And without that, that medallion is worthless. There's nothing about this legislation that enforces New York state law, and without it...
So you're right. So you're suing the city because you're saying enforce this street hail law that was put into place, obviously, years before an Uber came on board.
That's correct. In fact, we don't need any new legislation to solve the crisis that's unfolding. We just need enforcement of existing law, and it's the failure to do that that's caused the medallion to plunge. It's the usurping of that business by Uber that's caused the meters to decline, the fares to decline. And if we don't do something very soon, it's what's going to put these credit unions out of business.
Okay, but then on the flip side, Todd, of course, is the consumer and Uber who says, look, this proves that our business model works, Todd. And you know what? It works really, really well. And I'm sure you've seen their app today where they have the DeBlasio option. You know, what would happen if there was no Uber? There'd be no rides around for consumers. And also, listen, Todd, to this ad, right? One of the ads that Uber has put out, which I think pulls at the heartstrings for a lot of people here in New York.
Doctor, Queens, and get to the airport from Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And while taxis often refuse people in minority neighborhoods, Uber's there, taking more people to and from communities outside Manhattan than anyone. But Mayor de Blasio is pushing the agenda of his big taxi donors to limit Uber cars and drivers.
By the way, saying essentially, I mean, you know, you read between the lines, taxi drivers discriminate.
Well, you know, you're right. It does pull at the heartstrings, and Uber likes to say, and companies like that, to say that this is about competition or this is about innovation.
Right. But it is, right?
No, the reality is ultimately it's about the rule of law. Even competition depends for its ability to thrive on respect for the law. And in New York State, Uber does not respect the law. That's what this case is about. There's no question that competition is good for the market. There's no question that innovation is good for the market, and there's a democratic process in place to say that if the policy considerations that created a regulatory structure have changed, then you need to advocate for change in the law. What you don't get to do is simply ignore the law, and that's the predicate of their business model, and that's what I think is underpinning the real debate, the real sort of controversy that's at the heart of Uber.
Not just here, obviously, but in India or in California or anywhere else, is that, you know, what are the laws that apply to Uber and what are they flouting?
It's correct. And then there's a certain kind of irony to it, because when you talk about the need for deregulation, when you have a company that decides that it's simply going to disregard the law, you actually end up setting back the cause of deregulation. You actually ultimately hurt, because inevitably the pendulum swings. Inevitably, when you see riots in the street, when you see the kind of breakdown in a system, you end up with an over-response for regulation.
Well, and I can see, okay, so, you know, the medallions, I thought this was interesting. So delinquencies on taxi medallions, $50,000. I think these are according to your numbers.
That's correct.
In December 2013. Now those delinquencies are at $167 million as of May 31st. So I imagine there's, what, lots of bankruptcies. I mean, what are we going to see?
The numbers are even more stunning than that, because the numbers that you just quoted there, those were the numbers from January 2014 to May 31st, 2015, from basically under 50,000 to over 160 million. In just the 4 past weeks, those numbers have increased to over 200 million, a 22% increase in delinquencies in 4 weeks. Okay. While we're talking about the political debate that's unfolding in this city, a real crisis is at hand. And that's what's kind of stunning.
But what is that crisis going to look like, though? This is what like, what does that mean? No taxis or something? Like, what does that mean?
Well, it's a good question, because what you have to see the connection between is that this is an industry that depends on financing for its operations. So when credit unions and other lenders are no longer willing to refinance the loans for medallions, these loans are typically short-term loans. They have balloon payments at the end. And our clients have made heroic efforts to forestall this crisis. They've modified loans. They've adjusted terms.
The credit unions.
The credit unions.
Okay.
But there's only so much bandwidth. These are non-profit, federally insured credit unions. There's only so much that they can do. What we're saying to the city, what we've said in court, is that we are out of runway. We will not be able to continue to do that. And when we can't...
So I'm trying to get a sense. So what does that mean, though, exactly?
It means foreclosures.
Okay.
And foreclosures will, in a market that's already illiquid, that will drive the price of the medallion down lower, which in turn, because these banks and these lenders ultimately have to mark to market, ultimately you're talking about a collapse of that portfolio. When that happens, yes, ultimately these vehicles come off the road. We talk about 10,000 jobs that Uber says are on the line. This is an industry that employs tens of thousands of people.
And Uber would say they employ 10,000 people in New York City.
Uber has,
they said that in their ads, right?
They've justified this campaign against the mayor on the basis that he's going to potentially cost 10,000 jobs. But the reality is the collapse of the taxi industry will cost this city a multiple of 10 times that.
But then, Todd, they'll say that's capitalism at work.
No, that's breaking the law.